All right. So it was 10 months ago today. Obviously, it wasn't a Sunday, but it was June 30th, 2022. And this is April 30th, 2023. But 10 months ago, the Puerto Rican regulators, OSIF, put my bank into a receivership, which is exactly what the FDIC did with First Republic Bank on Friday. But here's the big difference. The FDIC is desperately trying to find somebody to buy this bank, right? They want another bank to buy the bank. Why? Because they want to protect the depositors. They're trying to make sure that on Monday morning, everybody that has an account at First Republic Bank can get their money, that nobody's checks are going to bounce. That's what they are trying to do. Now, of course, you've got banks coming up and saying, oh, we'll buy, but nobody wants to buy the whole bank, right? Because the bank is insolvent. You'd have to accept all those liabilities. So it's hard to sell a bankrupt entity. So, of course, you've got people who want to buy the good parts, and they want to leave the bad stuff to the FDIC, which means to the taxpayer. Well, when my bank was put in a receivership, there was actually a company, like Quinta, that had already offered to buy the bank. So they were there, a buyer. And instead of allowing this buyer to buy my bank, they put the bank in a receivership. The buyer was going to take the whole thing. They were going to assume all the liabilities, protect all the depositors, and inject another $7 million of capital on top of the capital the bank already had. So why did they do that? Also, after they rejected the sale, the minute they put the bank into receivership, a group of investors contacted the regulators, and then they contacted my lawyer, and they said, we want to buy that bank. Hold on, we want it. We want to take it out of receivership. We want the whole bank. We're going to operate it. And it was a very experienced team. In fact, one of the people who wanted to buy the bank was a former head of OSIF, the very agency that shut me down. One of the former heads of that agency wanted to buy my bank from me. And he had lots of other partners. A lot of other ex-OSIF people were part of this consortium. They had deep pockets from the U.S., so they wanted to buy the bank. So they had buyers lined up, and the Puerto Rican regulators turned them all away. They didn't want anybody to buy the bank. Think about the irony of that. They had what the FDIC is trying to get. But no, they wanted to leave the bank in receivership. Now, First Republic Bank is actually bankrupt. They actually don't have enough cash to cover all the deposits. In contrast, my bank wasn't bankrupt. I had millions in cash above what was owed to my deposits. Yet the irony of the way the world works, the customers of this bankrupt financial institution, on Monday morning, they're going to get all their money, courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer. On the other hand, the customers of my bank have been waiting 10 months now, and they haven't gotten any of their money. Again, courtesy of the government. So because of the government, people that had their money at a insolvent bank are going to get all their money. But also because of the government, people who had their money at a solvent bank, they're not getting any of their money either. Does this sound like capitalism, right? Where the government decides, which bank's customers get their money and which bank's customers don't? If the free market decided, then a lot of people at First Republic would have lost their money, and nobody at my bank would have lost any money. In fact, they would have been able to get all their money out if they wanted it 10 months ago. Now, you might ask, well, why? Why, if they had buyers for the bank, why didn't they let somebody buy the bank? I don't know. You got to ask those questions. Nobody seems to want to ask those questions. I mean, I have some theories. Now, one of the things was the company Quinta that was going to buy the bank is now publicly traded in the U.S. And when they announced the action to seize the bank, and they issued this cease and desist to tell the bank to stop functioning, right? You can't operate anymore. They inside that cease and desist, they rejected the buy of the bank from Quinta. And in the cease and desist, they wrote that the reason that they turned down this buy and they're putting the bank into bankruptcy, right? Which inconvenienced the customers now for 10 months. Now, OSIF obviously back then had no idea that 10 months later, the funds would still be tied up. But you know, when you open up a can of worms, worms are going to come out. They probably thought the customer money would be tied up for maybe 3 months, but there was no reason to tie it up at all. They just could have let Kinta buy it, right? And then everybody could have withdrawn their money whenever they wanted. But they came out and they said, the reason we're not letting this company buy this bank is because we discovered that Peter Schiff, after the sale of this bank, is still going to have ties to the bank because he's going to own 4.15% of this company. And we can't have that. We can't have Peter Schiff own 4.15% of the company. Wait a minute, I owned 100% of the company before, so I can't own 4% of it? But they said that we never told them about that. That was the problem, that we tried to pull a fast one, that we told them that I would have no ties to the bank, and that they just discovered, like recently, last minute, it buried into fine print, that I was going to have 4.15%. And so because of that, they turned down the transaction, which of course, so all the depositors have to suffer because somebody supposedly made that misrepresentation, except that wasn't true. Because from day one, in October of 2021, I had a meeting with the OSIF commissioner and the CEO of Kinta and his chief in-house counsel, the bank's outside counsel, and maybe 3 other members of OSIF. And we all sat around a table and we explained the terms of the transaction to them, which was a stock deal, that I was getting 130 shares of Kinta for my shares of the bank, however many I had. They knew that. In fact, one of the things that the OSIF commissioner told me and everybody at that table that she liked best about the deal was that the company buying the bank was going to be publicly traded, because she said, I like the idea of a second set of regulatory eyes on the bank, meaning not just OSIF regulated the bank, but the SEC, because it was a public company. So she really liked it. She liked my had no problem with my 4% ownership. And in fact, we have all the written documents because we sent the commissioner the terms of the deal a week before we had the meeting. And then the day after the meeting, we sent them more information, emailed the commissioner directly, prominently discussing my 4% ownership, the structure, all that, bold, top of the page, no way she could have missed it. In fact, she emailed back after she received the data about my ownership. Oh, thank you for the information. We got it. No questions, right? So they knew about it for 9 months. And then they said, oh, this is the reason that we're not approving the sale. Now, we know that's not the reason because that wasn't true. Now, the question is, even if that was true, why did they turn down this other group that wanted to buy the bank? I mean, that was certainly better for the customers. And again, all these buyers, they didn't want to fire any of the workers. In fact, they wanted to hire more workers. Now, one of the things that OSIF commissioner said at this press conference, that she said, well, the bank has a long history of non-compliance with certain things, which again wasn't true because we'd only been in Puerto Rico about 4 years. So that's not that long. But we didn't even have our first audit until 9 months before she said we had a long history of non-compliance. So at most, we weren't complying for 9 months, except we complied with everything they asked us to do. OSIF asked us to do a lot of stuff after that audit, and we did everything. I mean, it was an extensive job to do everything that they said we needed to fix, but we fixed it all.